New, or for those of you who are not new, regardless, I'm Dr. Leichliter. Welcome to the party. I am a movement disorder specialist over at Allegheny Health Network, sitting here in my office at Allegheny General. We're going to talk about Parkinson's disease. And so, as Casey said, this is all put on through the Parkinson's Foundation, Western Pennsylvania. So big thanks to them. If you have questions, I have some in the email. There was actually quite a few in email, so I'll start with those ones. But in the meantime, if you have questions, type them in the chat box. I'll get to them as I get to them, and we'll go from there. Two things that I always remind everybody is this is not a great place to get individualized treatment strategies or cares or plans. So don't send me a message that says, hey, I'm on this, this, and this. What do you want me to do next? My answer is invariably going to be, you should really talk to your doctor about that. It's very important to keep open lines of communication with your doctors, even though we are indeed hard to find and hard to get a hold of and hard to talk to. You have to do your best as best you can. And everything you hear is also my opinion. So that's the other caveat here. I like to think that my opinion is based on as much scientific data as I can come up with, or as much literature as I can find or know. But sometimes that doesn't exist. So I make stuff up. If I make stuff up, I will generally tell you I'm making stuff up, and I'll throw up some quotation marks. And let's get started. So I'm going to start with some of the questions that I got in email first, and then I'll work through these, and then I'll get to the questions in the chat box. I'm actually going to try to end up on time this time, or maybe even a little bit early. I do have a family place to get to later today. And so I may cut it a little bit short, but we'll figure it out. With that, let me get started. So the first ones I got were actually about kind of new or upcoming or kind of trial things. So the first one was actually about an article. They sent it to me that said Parkinson's could be treated with an inexpensive over-the-counter cough medicine if a new phase 3 trial is successful. So I looked it up, and the long and short of it is it was on something called Ambroxol, which I feel like maybe it was the same person who sent this question in. I'm not sure, but literally I feel like somebody just asked me about this in the clinic. The long story short is this is still in research. They're still studying this stuff. Ambroxol is basically a cough medicine. I'm not sure if it's available in this country, but they apparently use it in Europe. But the long story short is it works on glucocerebrosidase.
How do I mute this thing?
And glucocerebrosidase is generally the enzyme that we think is lacking in something called Gaucher's disease, which is a genetic condition, a neurodegenerative condition that really impacts people pretty severely. But it turns out that you have to have both genes to get Gaucher's disease. And if you only have one, it puts you at a much higher risk of Parkinson's disease. And so this was one of the newer genetic finds that we found over the past, really probably year, maybe 2 years, maybe 3 years, is glucocerebrosidase and its impact in Parkinson's disease. And so apparently this cough medicine actually works on that. Again, you guys have heard me say this multiple times over. I don't get too excited until I get good trials that tell me it works and I get it in my hands and I can start it in patients, right? We've been kind of, I don't want to say burned, but let's just say at the least let down by so many things that look promising, that start off saying, hey, look, in animal models, in phase 1 and 2 trials, this is really looking good. And then they get to that double-blind placebo-controlled trial in patients with Parkinson's disease, and it falls flat. And so while I'm always interested in hearing about these things, I'm always interested in keeping an eye out and an ear out for these things. I don't get overly exciting until I get more and better news. That's kind of my thought on that. But again, it is worth keeping in mind. And what you will see is a lot more of that. So what you're seeing in medicine is a lot more of that, which is basically repurposing of medicines. And realistically, that comes back to the fact that it's so incredibly expensive to come up with something new from benchtop to patient. It costs an arm and a leg. And it's a lot cheaper if you can just repurpose a medicine that's already being used or already being approved for something else. It's so much cheaper and easier to get. So keep your eye out for stuff like that, because you will see more of it, only because it's a lot easier to do that than it is to come up with something brand new. The second question was how does the doctor decide when the right time to refer a patient for DBS? So DBS is deep brain stimulator surgery, and in parentheses, this assuming the patient is open to that type of procedure. So the deep brain stimulator is a surgical procedure where we implant wires into your brain, we hook you up to a generator in your chest, and we can electrically block the signals that we think lead to Parkinson's symptoms. There's no easy answer to that question. Everything we do from a surgical standpoint is individualized care, individualized treatment. And the reason for that is the reasons behind deciding, hey, now is a great time to talk about surgery or think about surgery is different for every single person I talk to. We think that the surgery works for very similar things that the medicines work for. So it works better for tremors and stiffness and slowness of movement, and maybe not as good for things like walking and balance and speech and swallowing. It also isn't particularly great for people who have some memory problems. It's not going to fix vision problems or things like that. And so when you're dealing with patients, you really are trying to pick and choose which symptoms do they have? Does it make sense for sending you for something more invasive? Because again, deep brain stimulator surgery is pretty invasive. If it were to me, this is kind of my opinion on the fact, the ideal candidate for a surgical patient is a younger patient. Not that it's an age problem. There is no age limit to surgery, but generally more health conditions come up as you age. So younger patients who really don't have a lot of other comorbidities or other types of medical problems, who have typical Parkinson's disease, particularly tremor predominant typical Parkinson's disease, who have had good response to medicines. And maybe either we've tried a couple of medicines and they're having fluctuations, or they've had side effects to medicines. That's kind of the ideal person for surgery. Now, the ideal person doesn't come to my office very often. And so obviously, while that patient is pretty much a no-brainer from my standpoint that says, hey, we should get you to the surgeons, that, most patients don't fall into that category. So we are picking and choosing, what are we willing to try to accomplish? What are we willing to risk? What are the potential complications? What's good, what's bad? And so the reason why that's such a hard question is it is very individualized in terms of what you're trying to accomplish, what
That
the potential risks are, what the theoretical
choice
benefits
to do
are,
it that
and
I can
who would be the best person to do it for. Hope that answered the question. The next question was also deep brain stimulator related, which was how much choice does a patient have in deciding which vendor or brand of DBS device is used? Or is this usually decided by the doctor, hospital, and or insurance? And honestly, I'm not entirely sure the answer to that question. What we do here. So here we have a deep brain stimulator meeting once a month where myself, my nurse practitioner, my partner, her nurse practitioner, the two surgeons who do deep brain stimulator surgery here, which are Dr. Tomich and Dr. Whiting, their nurses, we all sit down and have a talk. We talk about patients that we've done already that are having problems, and we talk about patients that we are planning on doing in the near future. And oftentimes there we kind of decide which target would be the most beneficial, because there are a couple of different areas of the brain that you can put the leads or the wires. Sometimes we talk about which brand, but actually the surgeons themselves kind of have preferences for which one they put in. But we talk about it. I'm not sure how much say you guys have. I mean, I guess if you came to, Dr. Tomich or Dr. Whiting, or the guys putting them in, and said, hey, I really think this would be a good choice, and here's why. I mean, I don't think they would say, no, we're not going to do that. Maybe, I'm not sure. I've never run into that. I don't know if it's insurance driven. It probably is, because everything's insurance driven. I don't know that if it's gotten to the point where certain insurances prefer Medtronic versus Boston Scientific versus, St. Jude or Abbott. But I'm sure at some point it'll probably get to that. I don't know that it's hospital choice. So the short answer is I'm not entirely sure of the answer to that question. But if you really do have a preference, or if you think that one, you're going through the process and you think that one would be a good idea, or you just want to know how they came to the idea, the surgeons would probably be the best person to ask or talk to about it. Then I got another one that led me to a link, which was apparently on I don't know, some channel's news. There was a story about a girl from the Philippines who had a neurodegenerative condition, and they quote unquote, I don't know, I'll say quote unquote, fixed it with gene therapy. And the long story short, gene therapy into the brain involves drilling a hole into the skull, infusing or perfusing the brain in some sort of enzyme, chemical, something like that, to restore some functions. And it apparently worked. And so they asked, are we doing any of this in Parkinson's disease? And the short answer is yes, to an extent. So actually, my colleague, Dr. Van Laar, who many of you know, was actually doing research on this over at UPMC, and the UPMC guys were doing some of this research. And I think she's with the company now who was doing it, where they were infusing directly into the brain different types of enzymes, different types of chemicals, a bunch of different abbreviations, GDNF, which is growth-derived neurotrophic factor, other types of factors, other types of enzymes that you don't really need to know the names of, to see if we could kind of reset the receptor changes, the response of dopamine medicines, things like that. And they were actually at the last movement disorder meeting, I think she had 2 different posters that was showing good results on this type of a procedure. So the short answer to your question is yes, we are looking at these types of really infusion directly into the brain treatments. Yes, they do seem to be, somewhat effective, or at least worth continuing to pursue. I don't think they're quite ready for mainstream yet, or everybody yet. But again, we're always looking for more and new treatment strategies for people, especially if there's a way to kind of impact the trajectory of the disease or the course of disease, or if there's some way to kind of reset the receptors or get you doing better. So much like everything else, more to come on that once we get more data and more research. And that was all from that email. Let me go to the next email. I thought this was an interesting question. Does Parkinson's disease affect breathing? Is respiration rate slowed due to bradykinesia? Is the ability of deep breathing affected by rigidity? It's not a common thing that I get. So that is not a common complaint or issue that I get from people saying, because I'm stiff, my breathing is stiff, or because I'm slow, my breathing is slow. And generally, we think about breathing as being more controlled by the autonomic nervous system, which can also be impacted with Parkinson's disease. You guys have heard me talk about orthostatic hypotension, bowel and bladder problems, sleep problems, heart rate and blood pressure problems. These are all driven by the autonomic nervous system. And so breathing could be affected in that route, although I don't know that I've ever necessarily seen that or it's been a big issue. What I have seen in terms of breathing is kind of 2 things. One is something called ventilatory dyskinesia. So, just like you can kind of get squirmy movements, and that's a dyskinesia in your muscles, you can get dyskinesias in your diaphragm. And what that usually manifests as is people coming in complaining of a lot of feeling of short of breath, trouble catching their breath, even though their oxygen saturation never goes down, they never get like lightheaded or pass out. It just feels like they're really short of breath. Oftentimes, if it's typical, it correlates with the medicines or when they have other types of dyskinesia. So we usually think about dyskinesias when your medicine's at its peak. So it kind of kicks in and it overshoots. And that's when people tend to get squirmy. They tend to have difficulty sitting still. And you can get this this ventilatory dyskinesia. Again, asking the questions or bringing up the timing with medicines really helps us diagnose that. Because the first thing you tell me, if you come in and say, hey, I'm short of breath, I'm going to say, did you talk to your PCP? Did we make sure this isn't a heart or a lung problem? Neurologists don't like to deal with shortness of breath. But as long as you've done that, and especially if it kind of comes and goes, waxes and wanes with the medicines, then that definitely makes it a lot easier to come to that conclusion. But sometimes that's tough. The other time that I've seen breathing problems is when there's really kind of, I don't want to even say camptocormia, which is basically flexed in half, but very bad posture. So everybody here knows that posture is affected in Parkinson's disease. Everybody tends to come more flexed forward, head down, neck down, chest down. That's why you get nagged so much by your significant other to stand up straight, right? I hear it all the time. And so what ends up happening is when you get too flexed forward, that can kind of collapse the ribs and the thorax. And that can make breathing a little bit tougher too. That's the other time I've seen breathing impacted in Parkinson's disease, but realistically, it's not something that I hear about commonly. Regarding the rigidity in the arms, which you check during office visits, which this must be my patient, but I'm sure everybody does this. We all feel people's arms and wrists to feel for cogwheel rigidity. Is it possible to develop or have the same rigidity in parts of the leg or foot, i.e. the thigh, shin, ankle, and how would this be determined? The short answer is yes. I check for stiffness and rigidity in the arms because it's easy. It's readily available. I can grab your wrist. I can feel your arm. I can move you around. I can try to have you relaxed. You can do it in the leg too. You can kind of pull it and see if there's any ratcheting a little bit in the ankle, but the ankle is much harder. It's not as easy. It's harder to relax your legs. It's harder to feel that type of cogwheel rigidity in the ankle and the knee. And so while it is possible, I mean, you won't see me do it because it's so much easier to feel it in the wrist and the elbow. And we know that once you have it somewhere, you're probably going to have it most other places. And the other way that we check for rigidity and stiffness is by watching you walk anyway. And so if you have a lot of rigidity in your legs or stiffness in your legs, we're going to notice that when you get up to walk up and down the hall. And so the short answer is yes, you can get the same rigidity in all parts of your body, including your lower extremities, but it's not something that I would necessarily spend a lot of time testing, checking, things like that, at least not by grabbing your ankle or grabbing your leg. We have, I don't want to say fancy, but we have sneaky ways of picking up on everything. You may think we're looking at one thing when I'm talking to you or when I'm asking you questions, but realistically, I'm looking at everything and examining you constantly, even when you don't know or think that I'm doing that. I see everything. It's my job. Even though she said this was the last question, this was not actually the last question. So what causes the feet to freeze? And can anything be done to help this problem? We're not entirely sure of the mechanism of action behind freezing of gait. The way that I view it, and this is kind of I simplify things in my brain. My brain is simple. I have to simplify things in my head. The way that I view freezing is that your brain only has so much dopamine. In Parkinson's disease, you don't have enough of it. When your brain doesn't think it has enough dopamine to complete whatever task it is that you want it to complete, it shuts down. And that manifests itself as freezing. So going through a doorway requires more dopamine than just walking. And so a lot of my patients freeze in the doorway because your brain shuts down. It's like, wait a second, I can't handle this. I don't have enough dopamine to do this. It freezes. When you stand up and get started, initiating walking actually requires more energy and more dopamine. And so if your brain doesn't think you have it, that's when you hesitate and you freeze. Sometimes it can happen just walking. And again, I think about it, or I make it make sense in my head by saying it's your brain's reaction to not thinking it has enough dopamine to complete whatever task you're doing. That's why if you break down complex tasks into simple tasks, like instead of saying, I'm going to stand up, walk out the door and down the hall, if you say, I'm going to take a big step, or there's a line in front of you and you say, I'm going to step over this line, that's a much simpler task. Your brain can comprehend that. It recognizes that, okay, I don't have enough dopamine to walk out the door and down the hall, but I do have enough dopamine to take a step over this line, and you can do it. And that's called cueing. That's how you get unstuck. That's what a lot of people learn in physical therapy, or you just pick it up on your own. Hey, if I count, or if I say left foot, right foot, or if I take one big step, or if I have a line or a laser pointer, these are all ways to try to get unstuck. And I reconcile that in my head with your brain saying, okay, I can't do this big complicated task. I don't have enough dopamine to do that, but I can do this small one, and then that gets you started. I don't know if that's actually how the brain works, in all honesty, but that's how it makes sense to me in my head, and that's how I explain it to other people. I really don't think the actual mechanism of how that freezing of gait has happened has been worked out. And yes, there are some things you can do about freezing of gait, but it's one of the harder things to try to fix, at least from a medication standpoint. Again, if it seems to coincide with when your medicines wear off, then maybe a little bit more medicine fixes that. If it seems to coincide, which would be rare, for when your medicines are overshooting, then maybe decreasing it would help. If you notice that it's, early in the morning or later in the evening, maybe you can adjust your medicines to try to work on that. But really the best way to work on freezing of gait is learning how to cue, which is, okay, I'm stuck. I stop, take a breath, take one big step, talk to myself, count out loud, things like that. Those are really the things that I found have had the best success with kind of freezing of gait in general. But it's an important topic because freezing of gait directly increases your risk of falling. And falling, as you guys know, is not your friend. And so it is an important concept to think about and work on, even though it's not something that medicine necessarily is all that great at fixing. And then the actual last questions that were sent to me via email. And this, I think I alluded to a couple times ago, but again, if you're new, it never hurts to hear about these things again. It was, what kind of questions or information do I want my patients to bring up at their appointments, and how detailed should they be? And what kind of things can wait until the next appointment? And what needs more immediate attention? This is actually a good question for you guys. To me, I will address whatever information you bring. The more organized you are, the more efficient we can be. And so the more things we can kind of talk about and cover. And so a lot of my patients make lists of questions, which is good. If you really want to get organized, kind of ordering them in order of importance is probably the best idea, because then we make sure we cover the things that are the most important to you. My job in the office is to try to work on the things that are bothering you the most, right? My goal in the office is to try to figure out, how can I get you functioning the best with the limitations that we have, with the medicines that I know of, trying to keep you on as little medicine as possible, but I want you to be able to try to do all the things you want to do. That's really the objective that I have in the office. And so that's why you'll hear me ask questions like, well, what bothers you the most? What do we need to work on? What's the most important thing, or what's actually impacting your day-to-day life or quality of life the most? That's what we work on, right? I want to make sure we hit and we address the biggest problem. You may have a tremendous tremor that I pick up on exam, but if that's not what's keeping you going out to eat with your friends, it's your walking, then it doesn't make sense for me to start working on your tremor. And so figuring out what the most important thing is, or what's the most impactful thing, is really my job, and that's what I try to accomplish in the office. And so if you can think about that ahead of time, if you come in with your list of ideas or problems or questions, and you can figure out which one's the most important to you, or which one's impacting you the most, or which one's affecting your quality of life the most, then we at least make sure that we address it first, and we can go from there. There's nothing that necessarily I can say, oh, this across the board can always wait till the next time, or this needs to be addressed now. It's really not up to me. What I think is important might not be important to you, and vice versa. What I think is insignificant and unimportant might be the most pressing thing for you and most concerning thing for you. So realistically, my opinion doesn't count here. My opinion is not the most important when we're trying to figure out what to do. Yours is. And so there's never anything that I would say, I don't care that you care about that. We're going to talk about that next time. If it's super important to you, then we need to figure it out. We need to address it. So I don't think about it like that. What I would say is exactly what I said. Make your lists, make sure you write down things, because everybody gets to my office and they're like, I had 15 questions and now I can't remember any of them. So write them down, make a list, order of importance, and we go from there. That's a good question, and kind of good tips for not just me, but probably every doctor you go to. We all have 35 seconds to deal with each patient and each problem. And so it gets really rapid, and you're going to feel rushed. So if we can keep it organized, it definitely makes it better. I thought this was a really interesting question. Can moving to a different climate affect Parkinson's disease symptoms, i.e. patient moves from north to south and symptoms became worse? Which I thought was an interesting either observation or example, because usually the vast majority of my patients that spend time up here and down in Florida always do better when they're down in Florida. Almost across the board, if patients are going from north to south, they do better. I would have thought it'd be the other direction, south to north, but I don't know. Climate plays a role. So a lot of my patients are stiffer, shakier, slower when it's cold, at least in my experience. Probably part of the reason why people do better in Florida, although it's easier to get outside in Florida, it's sunnier in Florida, it's flatter in Florida, easier to walk around, exercise, be active. So all things that are the reasons why a lot of my patients do better when they get down there. But I don't think there's anything specific about, say, moving from one climate to another that would directly impact Parkinson's disease, outside of kind of other things. So when When you're thinking about multiple sclerosis, vitamin D actually plays a direct role in MS. And they've looked at different longitudes are actually affected more. I always wondered if there could be a role in things like vitamin D, vitamin B12, because again, here in Pittsburgh, we see such deficiencies in these things all the time. We don't get a lot of sunlight here, so everybody in Pittsburgh is vitamin D deficient. Does that actually play a role? And so if you go from climate to climate and kind of external factors change, could that actually impact the underlying Parkinson's disease? It probably could. I mean, I don't know that that's ever been proven. I don't know that there's been anything written about that. I don't know if anybody studied people who move from one climate or one location to a different climate or location and how their symptoms do. It sounds like an interesting research study. I'll add it to the list of ideas that we have, but I'm not sure it's ever been looked at. And generally, again, the majority of my patients, if they're going to and from, it's usually from here, in the spring and summer to Florida in the fall and winter. And again, in my experience, people usually do better when they do that. I don't know if that's a scientific answer, though. And I don't have a good answer for this question either, but I'll read it. Are there any kinds of shoes or soles in particular that help or hinder walking with Parkinson's disease? Some better, some more problematic. Again, I think it's user dependent. I mean, a lot of my patients don't do well in like flip-flops or things that don't give a lot of support. So theoretically, maybe a more supportive shoe, a harder sole might work better, but I don't know that that's ever been proven. I'm sure there are and I've seen there are specially designed shoes that are, ones you don't have to tie or that kind of zip, that might make it a little bit easier from a, coordinated movement or fine motor control standpoint. But I don't know if there's necessarily one brand of shoe or one type of sole or insert that I think is better than another. I'm by no means a shoe expert, not even close. I wear one pair of shoes for pretty much 6 months or a year, and then I buy a similar pair of shoes and change. So my opinion on shoes is kind of iffy at best. And it really probably is just a matter of trial and error. Everybody's probably a little bit different. You have to figure out what works best for you. If you find a shoe that does support you and helps your walking a little bit better, go for it. If you find shoes or types of shoes or sandals that make you fall, stay away from those ones. Falling is not your friend, so definitely make sure you find shoes that do work for you. And I have a feeling it's just kind of a lot of trial and error. Well, that was a lot of questions that were actually emailed. So thank you for the emails. At the end of the day, it's always good to start with some of those questions, give you guys a chance or time to type stuff into the box. And those were good questions. Now I'll get to the ones that are in my chat box here. Can I talk about Parkinson's related anxiety and depression? I mean, that's a whole talk in and of itself. So statistically, anxiety and depression goes along with Parkinson's disease 50% of the time. My opinion is that's a huge underestimate. I would say it's at least 80%. The vast majority of my patients have some sort of underlying anxiety and depression. It's graded, right? Some people are more severe, some people are less severe, but the vast majority of my patients have some sort of underlying anxiety, depression, mood disorder, so on and so forth. And it's super important because it doesn't respond as well to, say, Cinemet, right? There's some mood benefit to Cinemet, Mirapex, the dopamine medicines, because dopamine does play some role in the reward pathway and mood. But reason number two is it's really, really impactful for quality of life. So if it's ignored, or if it's undertreated, or if it's not addressed, I find that the chances of us having good success with anything else are much, much less. And this is why, even though nobody likes to hear it, this is why I refer patients all the time or suggest to patients all the time that they get a psychiatrist and a psychologist. That's who deals with anxiety and depression the best. This is their subspecialty. PCPs do it, but they're not that good at it. I do it, but I'm not that good at it. Psychiatrists and psychologists, because I do think psychiatrists because I do think medications help, but psychologists because I think working on how to deal with it and get through it is also really, really important. And so I really feel like this is an undertreated component of Parkinson's disease. partly because people don't like to talk about it, and partly because people are really, really resistant to go to psychiatry, and partly because any psychiatrists and psychologists, let alone good ones, are really, really hard to find and get into. So this is a very big problem that I don't think we do very good at, or we don't do a very good job of. And it's so important because I really do think it directly impacts the chances of us having success from a movement standpoint. If we ignore the anxiety and depression, or if we think, oh, it's not that bad, we can handle it, it makes treating the tremors and the stiffness and the walking so much harder. Our chances of success go way down. Again, I don't have any data to back that up or proof, but that's just what I see in clinic. Is it really is worth bringing up, worth talking about, and worth figuring out a way to address it. And usually that means you really should find a psychiatrist and a psychologist, but I think it's a huge problem. Does your office work with patients that have stride data reports to show how they're doing? I mean, my office, you're talking to my office right now. It's me. Don't get me wrong. Brandy's on the line. She's my secretary. She does a fantastic job. Megan's my nurse. She does a great job. Casey's new. She's my nurse practitioner. She's doing a great job. Everybody does a great job. But realistically, data is probably going to come to me. And this is one of the things that, and I'm not even sure what the stride data is. I assume this is a wearable thing or a watch or a phone thing that kind of gives me information about how you're doing during the day. And all of these things are just going to, the problem that I foresee in the future is use of technology, right? It generates so much information and so much data that I don't have time to go through it all. And this is where we're really going to need some sort of artificial intelligence to sort through these things, make it simpler, make it easier to digest and comprehend, to make it usable or make it useful. If they think that I'm going to go through page after page after page of data and reports from devices or data, it's just not going to happen. That doesn't fit into data. I can only take care of one person, and I have 19 or 20 that I have to see in a day. And so this is going to be a problem that comes up time and time again. But the short answer is I'm always willing to look at something if you have it, if you bring it in, if you show me. But we don't have necessarily anybody in the office that takes data, coordinates data, filters data. We're just not there yet. Any advice on how to better reach or aim for the toilet during middle of the night bathroom breaks? I mean, the best place to start with that is something like an occupational therapist or a physical therapist to really work on that. Again, if you're having trouble getting to the bathroom, bedside commodes are helpful. Again, the problem with a lot of things, and this is something to consider for whoever sent that message, is, are you having trouble getting to the bathroom or navigating it because your pills have worn off? Right? It's not uncommon for patients to take pills every 3-4 hours during the day, and then they wonder why 3 or 4 hours after they go to bed at night, they wake up and they're stiff and they can't move. Well, guess what? Your pills wear off overnight too. And so that might be something to consider. Do we need to change something or do something different to help you move better in the middle of the night? There's no easy answer to that question. And trying to piece together, is it a medicine wearing off problem? Is it the bathroom's just too far and too narrow and it makes it difficult in the middle of the night type of problem? Do we need to get you to some more therapy, more exercise, more something to work on that? I mean, that's how I would try to think about it or address it. Is it possible? Yes. Or worth it? Also, yes, to try to track good days and bad days. It usually is unpredictable. And this is what I tell a lot of my patients in the clinic. Everybody comes in and tells me the same thing. I love the dog, Casey. That's not what they tell me. They come in and say, some days I wake up and I feel like I don't have Parkinson's disease. Sometimes I'll have 2 days in a row where I feel great. And then I have days where I wake up and I can't move. And I can't figure it out. I can't figure out a rhyme or reason. I can't seem to piece together why or what or when. And is it totally unpredictable? Well, sort of. The problem with the predictability of is there's so many variables that play a role in how you're doing. Not just, how much medicine you've taken or when you took it, but also what you ate, when you slept, how well you slept, your mood. Are you anxious? Are you depressed? Are you nervous? Are you upset? Are you stressed? How much exercise have you done? How much did you do yesterday? How did your medicines work yesterday? What's the temperature? What's the weather? There's so many different variables that impact your state of dopamine at any given time that it becomes almost unpredictable or impossible to track all of these things. It's worth it because if you do find a pattern, then you can use that to your advantage, right? We can use that to either adjust your medicines. You can use it to figure out how to maintain or maximize your good days. But in my experience, it is fairly unpredictable. And I think it's because there's so many different variables, you just can't control or, keep track of all of them. It's semi-possible. You can try, and it's worth it because if you do find a pattern, it's helpful, but don't get so caught up in it or super frustrated if you just don't find any patterns. So Calatrio looks interesting. So the Calatrio is a wrist worn device that sends signals up to your brain and back that tend to block signals that help you shake or that make you shake. And so it's a wrist wearable device used for tremors. The biggest problem that I've had with Calatrio is I have yet to get one. I have yet to get my hands on one and play with one. Or if I did, it was only one. And so I just can't seem to get it. Even though it's reportedly available, I filled out, half a dozen prescriptions for the thing. It either comes back, oh, well, it's not available for you, or, oh, that's going to cost you both an arm and a leg and your firstborn child. Or, for whatever reason, I just can't get it. And so jury's still out. I mean, if you watch the videos, if you go to the website, it looks great, right? But again, I always reserve judgment for actually getting a hold of something, playing with something, using something, and getting good feedback from it. And I just haven't gotten it yet. What about the vibrating glove? Well, again, I'm super interested in the vibrating glove. The problem that I have, because if you watch those videos, man, does that look impressive, right? I think we all saw those videos. The problem is they're just now starting research trials. I think they tested in like 7 people, and now they have to go through all the trials. They have to go through the FDA, which again, I know I'm recorded, but I feel like it's safe to say anything that goes through the government takes forever. I don't think that's going to get me banned from Zoom. So we're still years away from getting it. And so again, even though the problem that I have is I'm always the Debbie Downer. I'm always like the negative one who says, we got to wait. But I feel like we just keep getting all these videos and all this information that says, look what's coming. Look at how good this is. This is going to be a game changer. This is going to be earth shattering. This is going to fix Parkinson's disease. This is going to be the next carbidopa levodopa. And then we just sit here and wait for it. You don't hear much. And then you hear, oh yeah, it didn't work. Sorry. And so I really don't get overly excited until I can get my hands on these things. And I think we're still a ways away from getting my hands on them. This is good. So when it comes to shoes and footwear, I find elastic shoelaces to be very helpful to make the shoes slide on. So again, it's all trial and error. You got to figure out what works the best for you. And so, I think at the end of the day, it's you definitely share information. So if you find something that's helpful, post it on here, post it on the chat, send it to Casey, she'll get it out. I mean, again, I think the more we communicate and the more people say, hey, this worked for me, might not work for you, but it really worked for me, the better off we'll all be. How would I find a psychiatrist and a psychologist in my home area? They're so hard to find. This is one of the more frustrating things that I run into or that patients run into. The short answer is calling your insurance company. They can usually guide you to, again, not that any of us want to call the insurance company. Believe me, I don't like calling the insurance company either. But that's probably the easiest and quickest and best way to find people who are nearest you. Again, there's no easy answer. There's such a shortage. There's so many that aren't taking new patients or only seeing patients via Zoom or computer. Then there's personalities that you have to get along with. And so it's such a hard thing. I know I didn't never said that what I was asking was easy or what I was recommending was easy, but if you can, it really is worth your while. Senior center at Shadyside Hospital. Sounds good to me. I use Cognitive Behavioral Institute for my psychiatrist as my medication management and clinical therapy. They have many locations and also will meet virtually, and I recommend it. Great. Write that one down. Again, we need as much good information as we can get. If I need to take a Cinemet pill in the middle of the night, should I sit up for 10 or 15 minutes before lying back down to allow Cinemet to travel down the digestive system? No, you don't have to. Not unless you're somebody who thinks gets stuck and you're choking. But realistically, as long as your esophagus is working, that ends up in the stomach. Doesn't matter what position you're going to be in, it's going to hang out in your stomach for a while. Most of patients with Parkinson's disease have slow gastric emptying, so it just kind of hangs out there for a bit. It does get dissolved and it actually works in the small intestine, so that's where it has to get to. But I'm not sure sitting up, laying down, the position you're in is really going to alter that. So I don't think you have to. If you have swallowing problems, that's a different story. Then you do have to sit up, make sure it's getting down. You're doing all the things the speech therapist or somebody has told you. I think I hit the end. I talked way too fast here. I think I actually hit the end of the questions. Casey, am I missing something?
I don't think so.
I mean, I'm not usually that fast.
Right. I know that you need to head out pretty soon, but
I do. So I was gonna actually abbreviate this one anyway. So again, I have a viewing that I have to get to for my family, which also, if you're my patients and you got canceled for tomorrow, I apologize 1,000 times. I have a funeral to go to. This is the one time you can blame me. It's not normally my fault when you get canceled or you get moved, but this time it was definitively my fault. But so I was going to shorten this one anyway. But again, I think there were a lot of good questions. And I think the take home message really is having good lines of communication with your doctor, making sure you organize yourself going to office visits, because you don't get that much time in front of the doctor, no matter if it's me or somebody else. And so as organized as you can be, order kind of what's important to you. When it comes to the symptoms that we always talk about, kind of the resounding theme is pay attention to how it's related to the ups and downs of your medicines. Is there any correlation? Is there any time frame that seems to fit? All of that is good and useful information for somebody like me to try to figure out what the best plan is for you. We didn't even talk about exercise today, which is my favorite topic. And so again, I assume that just means everybody knows that that's the best plan for you. And so at the end of the day, I'll take that opportunity to pass it back to you, Casey, since I know you have a lot to talk about exercise.
Yes. So we have a fundraiser that started yesterday, and you can still join. Pedal Beyond Parkinson's. You get to keep track of the miles. We have several studios that are participating. And I'll just show you really quickly. Look at all these leaders here. Let me just show you the.
I got to get on my Peloton and get on the board.
Yes, get on the board. I know. So it's easy to create a page. We can help you. And these are some places you can go. You can also ride on your own, but we'd love for you to participate. We're going to have a fun event on Saturday, March 4th at the Barrel Family YMCA in Wexford. But this is a great way to be active in the month of February. If you need to find the page, just simply go to our website. Oops. And it's right there.
Great. And then again, we have our conference coming up in April.
Yes.
I also plan on talking about exercise there. So we got a lot of things coming up. Definitely check out the page. Definitely join all of our stuff and we'll go from there.
Where is that conference going to be held?
At the Hilton Garden in South Point.
Good.
It's on Saturday, April 29th. We have Jimmy Choi as our keynote. He was an American Ninja Warrior. He has young onset Parkinson's, and he's going to tell his story and share how exercise and healthy living has really helped him. And his wife, his care partner, will be presenting as well, and Dr. Leichliter, and we'll have some sessions on communication and speech and cognition as well.
And if you need motivation to exercise, go watch Mr. Choi's, I don't know, is that YouTube video or whatever it was, but man, it made me want to get out and go run a marathon. So
yeah,
definitely check it out and get out and do some exercise.
Well, thank you, everybody.
All right, we'll do it again next month. So again, we're going to cut this one a little bit short. Casey, what day did you tell me it was? The 2nd?
Yes.
March 2nd,
no.
I think.
Oh, no? Yeah. The talk with the doc is on March 2nd.
The next talk. So again, as long as you guys have questions, keep bringing them. We'll keep doing it. The next time we'll meet up, it'll be on March 2nd. And until then, keep doing what you're doing.
Bye, and thank you,
Thanks,
Dr.
guys.
Leichliter.
Thank
Thank you,
you. No
No
everybody.
problem.
Thank you, bye.
Bye.